Okay, so our plan for language this week is basically the same from Monday to Friday. The exception is on Thursday, we are actually having our reading buddies come from Lee Academy. So I don't know how this will impact on the literacy block because the timing is kind of during that literacy block. So I'm thinking that if it does impact a bit on the writer's workshop piece, that the students could still share in writing their reflections after they've read with their buddy, and that buddies could kind of work with them on part of that writing too, so that everyone could be kind of writing. I will be doing some more mini lessons this week when it comes to the writer's workshop. One of the things is definitely on adding more details, especially when it comes to list writing. I'm glad to see students starting to write the list, and for some of them, it's big that we're just sounding out the individual words, but now I'd like to get them to kind of expand on it a bit. And I'm thinking even if we could look at things like the color words and things like that to just add a few more details, that this might be a nice way to do so. So I've done a mini lesson already on this, but it's something that I'd like to kind of go back and explore. Also, a different form with regards to story writing. I know some students are already kind of taking an interest in this, so getting them to kind of take what they've said orally and get it down into writing. So this will be one that not all students will be necessarily doing it in the same way, but looking at how they can kind of expand on their ideas and stories, so story ideas. And we'll also have the social studies connection for this week. So there will be some provocations that I'm going to be putting out, and students can label them. So not only will it provide a bit of a printing opportunity, but also one for vocab, and also putting down their observations and questions. Okay, so in math, on Monday, I'm going to get students to start writing the song for the piece of art that they saw last week, and the one that they basically taking their piece of art and writing down the song that they would like to use. I want them to kind of get a feel on not only how the song can get transferred onto the paper, but now that they've kind of played with those manipulatives, kind of moving from the idea of the manipulatives over to the paper, but also for the purpose of counting. And so looking at how they can kind of count those objects, looking at some of this stuff related to the actual number writing, which I know is down as one of the expectations and stuff too. So kind of that number printing piece in that concept, but also looking at the groupings of the numbers as they start to count. I think it might be a little bit easier when it's on the paper as well. So starting to kind of get that piece down, and it will also overlap with some of the language and the writing time that some of them need to, and get them into even thinking about the lines and circles and things like that. So that could be good with our art piece as well. So kind of getting them to do that, and then look at how they might be able to play some of the notes. So I'm going to bring in some of the musical instruments and get them to explore some of their playing and how else can you play, how can you use your body to play, so what kinds of things can you tap or clap or move and that kind of thing, and maybe putting out some options for them to kind of experiment with once they get it written down, which will be a nice bonus too. Now this Tuesday one, I'm actually going to move to Wednesday. And I'd like, since we're kind of looking at the piece that goes with the arts, I'd like to kind of do it in the same way. So on Wednesday, we're going to be experimenting with materials for the art and the numbers, and looking at how to create and represent the different numbers. So I want them then to also look at a bunch of the different numbers. So it's where we can look at things like the hundreds chart, how they can use the 10 frames, how they can group to count. So like even putting things in groups of 5 or 10 or 2 in order to count things a little bit easier. So I want them to kind of play and explore. So I'm thinking here, even with this, I wouldn't be necessarily using any like glue or tape, but just other materials that they can manipulate and use for artwork without actually putting them down or like fastening them, I guess, to a piece of paper or something, but giving them a chance to actually represent those different numbers. Okay, so this is actually now going to become Tuesday's one, where we're going to start looking at the art provocations. So I'm going to take these elements of design with line, shape, and color and kind of overlap them a little bit with some of the math concepts. And I'm thinking about bringing in some things like, because especially with the shape and the color, or with the line and the shape, even looking at some of those ideas from Anne Maria before with things like using the pipe cleaners and how they can form them into different lines. Maybe even looking at things like lines in nature and what they can do. Drawing lines, painting lines. So I'd really just like to kind of get them playing around with the concepts of what they can do. And I'm just thinking here, I really need some tablecloths if we're going to be doing some painting. So I'll add that to my to purchase list. But yeah, kind of letting them experiment a little bit with that. And at the end also kind of reflecting on what they learned from the creation process, which will not only get them into the art part, but also hopefully into some of the math, even with some of the shapes, how to make the shapes in the different ways. So then we can even look at the idea that a circle is still a circle regardless of its size, or a triangle is still a triangle regardless of its size. So, kind of being able to put that down. Organizing these reflections might be a way of actually looking at data management as we kind of organize the reflection piece. Hold on, I don't know what I just did there. There we go. So the data management might help us as we kind of organize it. So all of that piece I'd like to kind of look at a bit on Tuesday. I don't know, depending on how we get onto it, some of it might kind of overlap a bit into Wednesday as well. But I think with kind of based on where we're going, it makes sense to kind of experiment a bit, because that might even impact on how they look at organizing some of their materials as they try to play around with some different number combinations with some art pieces too, and start to look at how they might kind of create some abstract art with different tools in the classroom. So then for Thursday, there's a couple things. We need to really look at this success criteria piece, and part of it may actually come out before Thursday, but really looking at the math and the what are those questions called? I'm totally missing the word here. Sorry, it's like got out of me, but things about where we kind of problem solve or whatever. So looking at that the success criteria is not going to come out of the specific expectations. It's going to kind of come out of that other like little model or whatever. So I've done a little bit of thinking of the ones I'd like to kind of pull, and then I know it's going to be co-created with a lot of guidance kind of for me, but it's what I'd like to play with. And then I want them to start looking at a plan for the math art that they're going to choose to create for this art gallery. So I think this is where we also need to look very closely at what the requirements are for this project. And this is where I'd almost like to look at it in conjunction with the students, so we can kind of like write it together, but that they can really look at what's being required. I've kind of got the big idea in mind, but some of the specifics, so that we can ensure that all the key things are being addressed, and looking at what materials are they going to use, what ones do they need, so we can get a little bit of the language and the writing piece in there, but also making sure that they've all got all of those different connections for the math. So if they've got patterning, what kind of patterning is it going to be? How are they going to create the patterns? How are they going to explain them? If it's the shapes piece, okay, again, what shapes might they use? How might they use them? So we can get into some of those different pieces. And then on Friday, I'd like them, assuming that we kind of get that piece done Thursday, to start looking at writing their music for their math art. So we can look at counting the notes again. So again, we look at different counting options, which is great. And then deciding on how they're actually going to play this music. So I think that this will be a nice little focus as we kind of look at it. I'd love for them to kind of play it, and then we could work together to play, record, and then I could just have them kind of going in the background so the people can listen to the music and kind of see the art that inspires that music in them, and they can have kind of a little follow up, especially when the classes come to visit. So that's kind of my thinking with it, and I like to kind of expand on that with them so that they have an idea that what they're going to need to do is that when the classes come, they're going to need to look at the pieces of art and try to match those pieces of art with the music that they hear kind of playing in the background. So those ideas can go together, and then seeing where we are, we can then determine the date for the actual visits, which will hopefully help lead to some nice little writing opportunities as people make the signs asking the classes to come and visit and what information needs to go on those signs, and that can actually link to some of our writing and media texts and stuff as well, which is awesome. So hopefully we can kind of connect those ones too.